Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. Fire Medic Adventure 17. It's Matt. I am that guy, that firefighter medic guy. Good to see you all once again. Well, just when you think that, it kind of covered everything there is to cover with the Stardust Racers incident and that we're probably getting close to wrapping everything up. And, we might do one or two videos here or there in the near future, follow-ups, if you will. This thing just keeps on throwing information out there, and the majority of it is coming from the Benjamin Crump side, the Kevin Rodriguez Zavala's family side. As I said in my last video I did like this, it feels like there's a shift going on because at first when this thing happened, everybody was very sympathetic to what happened. Everybody felt terribly. Everybody wanted to try to do what they could to offer sympathies to his family. And, hey, let's try to put our heads together to see if we can't figure this thing out. So, some changes might possibly be made so this doesn't happen again, or to do our best to try to prevent this from happening again. And what it's turned into is basically a circus. This is turning into a grandstanding circus. And the Benjamin Crump side is now doing everything they can to try to get this thing shut down now. But if you remember early on, they didn't want it shut down for too long, or they didn't want it closed permanently. That's what they kept saying. But now, look at where it's going. And if you go back to my early videos I did on this, I was predicting this where it's going back then, because I just know how these people work. They start out with, well, we don't want it closed for too long, but we want to know what's going on, and we don't want it to open too soon. A couple weeks go on, and then obviously Universal does their thing, and they've deemed it to be perfectly safe for everybody, and they open it up, and then they're like, and then the family in the Benjamin Crump side's like, it's too soon, shut it back down. And the reason for closing it isn't because that they really believe it's unsafe. What I believe is they want control over this. They want to shut it down because they just don't want it running. If you look at the psychology of things, and this goes for pretty much anything and everything, when you have a certain side that starts losing every argument, starts running out of ideas to stand on, it basically is losing the battle. Instead of just bowing out, they start getting louder and louder and louder. And as I've said before, the louder somebody gets and the more insults get thrown out there and the more grandstanding that goes on, the lesser of an argument they have. That's all they know how to resort to, is just screaming and yelling and tearing things down, basically. And that goes into my first of 3 talking points that we're going to go over today. First is this Juneteenth Coalition. I had some emails come across from some viewers of the channel, and they sent me some links to this, and I took a look at it, and of course, it's the same old, same old. So we're going to watch one of these clips together, and we'll break that down. And then the second thing we'll talk about is, there's new calls for the closure of Stardust Racers. They want this thing shut down now because now the argument is restraints. The restraints aren't safe, and the restraints are failing. And once again, these are topics and links that you all have sent me to my email that I put out there on the channel. And then the third thing we'll talk about today is, I'm going to call it the Stardust Racers Reddit story. A couple of you all sent me some links to Reddit where there's a story somebody wrote by a possible eyewitness that claims they witnessed the entire thing. And we'll put it up on the screen here when we get to that. But we're going to go through it, and we'll read it together. And I'm going to give you my thoughts and opinions on it. I mean, it's an interesting story to read. But as I've said before, with my paramedic brain that I have and my analytical mind, there's things in there that just don't add up. But you have to, as we would say, read between the lines. You have to read it very carefully. When you look at some of the things that are said in there, you're kind of like, I don't know about this. It seems a little like you're stretching a little bit, like trying to sensationalize things. I mean, there's nothing to prove as of right now whether they were or weren't there. I mean, this is a line-by-line story of exactly what somebody supposedly saw that was on the Stardust Racers roller coaster train, the same one that Kevin had his severe injuries on that later he succumbed to. But we'll go through that, and I'll walk you all through my thoughts and opinions on the Stardust Racers story from Reddit. Before we get started, though, the very first thing I want to do is thank you all. I want to thank each and every one of you, the viewers of the channel, everybody that comes and watches the channel and supports the channel. You all are awesome, man. I really have enjoyed interacting with you all through the comments. Like I said, 99.9% of the comments have been amazing. There's a few out there that, in my own opinion, they're just trying to stir up issues. And like I said, you want to come into the chats and you want to try to throw a comment out there and stir up issues, I mean, that's fine, but be ready to answer back. You know, my theory is if you're going to throw something out there, you better be ready to defend it. And if you can't, then, well, I guess your theories weren't correct in the first place and that you're just trying to create problems. Before we get into this, I have a couple of thank yous. I just took everybody's first name. I didn't want to put anybody's last name in there because you never know how people are with their full names being out there on the interwebs. But these are the names from everybody that sent me emails on the various topics we're going to get ready to talk about here. So I want to thank you to Adam, Ryan, Maggie, Stephanie, James, Eric, and Ivan. Thank you all very much for sending me those. I've gone through them all. And like I said, let's get into this a little bit, shall we? So the first talking point, this Juneteenth Coalition, there was a link that was sent to me through email, and I opened it up, and it was from one of the local news stations here in Orlando, and of course, they're beating the drum again of we have to close Stardust Racers down, or Universal has to close Stardust Racers down. They can't give a good reason for it other than it's just too soon. It's just too soon. That the family's not done grieving yet and all this other stuff. And folks, I'm going to tell you something. If something were to ever happen to me on a ride like that and it was deemed that it was just one of those weird incidents that happened and the ride was perfectly safe, get the ride reopened. Let people start enjoying it again. Keeping a ride closed just for the sake of, well, the family just doesn't feel like it should be open yet, it's too soon. And that Universal, they're going to make money anyway. There's that stupid talking point they keep throwing out there. Well, they're $1 billion corporation, and they're going to make money. And it's all about, you can see which direction these people lean to. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds with politics on this, but it's always the same talking points. They always talk about the billionaires and how, you know, they don't need to be making all this money, or they don't care about people's lives because it's all about money. Believe me, if Stardust Racers was that unsafe, Universal would have never decided to reopen that ride. They're not going to put people in harm's way deliberately. I like I said, I don't want people to think I'm shilling for this company either, because I'm not, but I've worked for them. I know how they run. Same thing with SeaWorld. They're not going to open a ride if it's not safe. They're just not going to do it. So that argument is already out the window. They just don't want it open because they're not getting their way with this. That's where this is going. And then, like I said earlier, it's the same old talking points. Either you do what we say, or we're going to make your life hell until you give us what we want. Well, this is where it might take some pushback from all of us, from the coaster community and the roller coaster enthusiasts, the theme park enthusiasts. It's time to tell these people to shut up. I'm going to play the news clip for you and listen to what this woman says. So here we go. Watch this.
I knew tonight the group that advocated for the Orlando Free Fall ride to be shut down at Icon Park after a teenager fell to his death is now calling for Stardust Racers to be closed.
WESH's Gail Pascal Brown talked with the Juneteenth Project Coalition, which started a petition to do just that.
In April of 2022, the founder of the Juneteenth Project made it abundantly clear the Orlando Freefall Drop Tower ride at Icon Park had to come down. The nonprofit organization started a petition and held a peaceful protest in honor of 14-year-old Tyree Sampson, who fell off the ride and died. Tina Wilson is sounding the alarm again. This time, she started a petition Sunday night to shut down Stardust Racers at Epic Universe.
The death trap. It is a death trap. And I'm a disabled American veteran. I have been in a wheelchair. But for them to reopen the ride, it's just a slap in the face.
The Universal Orlando ride reopened Saturday night, just over 2 weeks after the death of 32-year-old Kevin Rodriguez Zavala.
Once we get a fair amount of signatures, if I have to get my bullhorn and go and stand out in front of Universal Studios until they shut that ride down, I will, because it's not fair.
The Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services stated, following the incident, Universal contacted the department as required by Florida law and voluntarily invited the department to observe all testing and inspections, which exceeded state requirements.
Did you lose a family member on that ride? That's what I'm asking the CEO and the Department of Agriculture. Did you lose a family member? How would you feel if 2 weeks after that individual passed and it's business as usual?
President and COO of Universal Orlando, Karen Irwin, said internal findings to date confirmed that the ride systems functioned as intended. Equipment was intact at the ride start, throughout the duration of the ride, and upon the ride's vehicle's return to the station. However, Wilson pointed out Zavala's family still has an ongoing investigation.
So you could not wait. You're going to make money anyway. You're Universal. You're a big corporation. It's very insensitive. Shut down the ride until the investigation and the family has some kind of closure. It's only been 2 weeks.
Tina Wilson says their heartfelt sympathies go out to the grieving family, and her charity is working to advocate for justice for them through its petition on change.org. Back to you.
So there you go. If you remember, a couple weeks ago now, it went from, well, we don't want this closed permanently. We just want to know what happened. And now it's shut it down. And notice the same rhetoric out there in front of the drop tower with her bullhorn and that. Shut this down. And they called the Icon Park drop tower a death trap. And notice the similar messaging. It's a death trap. Now, for me, if I'm Universal and I got some woman out there running around on news stations claiming that I'm operating a park that has rides that are considered death traps, we're going to tangle in a court of law, because if you're going to make that kind of claim, then you better be ready to prove it, and not just by a single isolated incident. You better be ready to have all kinds of evidence to come forward with that says that you drew the conclusion to make that statement. And the other thing, she claims that she's a disabled American veteran, that she has been in a wheelchair. Okay, so what does that have to do with the fact that Stardust Racers reopened? She's threatening to get her bullhorn and go out there and basically make a fool out of herself until they close down Stardust Racers. Now, I will say Universal's a lot larger company than the people that ran the drop tower at Icon Park. And Universal is not going to play around with this ridiculousness. If you're going to go out there and disrupt guests on their vacation because you think that this opened up too soon and that the family hasn't had enough time to grieve and that the ride should be shut down, and then you're going to make a fool out of yourself out there and scream at the top of your lungs with a bullhorn. She tries to do that. I hope they bring as much leverage against her as the law will permit. The other thing, too, is I'd be curious to pull a Freedom of Information Act on her as far as her military service, because she does claim that she's a disabled veteran and that she has been in a wheelchair. Well, the nice thing about the United States here is if you have enough information, you can pull somebody's info through the Freedom of Information Act and find out exactly what they did. You're going to make that claim. I hope you did serve in the military. That's the other thing out there is people, they try to grandstand on these incidents that happen by making these big claims that, oh, I'm disabled. So if she is disabled, what does that have to do with anything that's happening now? And then sitting there going, well, it's not fair that they reopened the ride and that it's too soon. Well, when is it not too soon? That's why I'm saying, folks, and this is why I got so wound up on one of my other videos on this, is it's just like the events of 2020. If you sit around and wait for them to decide when we need to reopen or when we need to get back to normal or, when to reopen the ride, they'll never reopen it because it will never be enough. That's how these people work. They want it closed, but they don't ever want it open. They want to see that thing torn down. That's what they're saying through their teeth. They want it torn down, just like the Icon Park drop tower. You know, they're not outright saying it, but if you read through the lines and read through the messaging and compare the two, they want it to come down because they're not happy. Well, I hate to tell you, folks, you cannot, one, keep a ride shuttered for an undisclosed amount of time, especially when it's been cleared by multiple agencies that have all of the modern technology imaginable to say whether or not this ride's safe or not. You know, once it's been cleared to reopen, it's cleared to reopen. It's very similar to a person that let's say gets injured and they're off work and they can't do anything. And the doctor's like, hey, you're cleared. You're all healthy. Go back to work. Well, it's too soon. What do you mean? I cleared you. You're good to go. Go back to work. Go make some money. Go enjoy life. Nope, too soon. And then what you end up having is people want to sit out and do nothing for forever. They don't ever want to come back to work. You know what I mean? It's very similar to that. So I hope that Universal and us, the fans of the theme park industry as well as roller coasters, if this woman tries to go out there and make a scene like that, I will tell you, man, I know she won't be able to get inside property, but if she's outside of property and I hear this going on, I'll take a ride over there. I can get into the parking lot of Epic Universe with my pass. I don't mind, you know, I'm not calling for any violence at all, but I'll go up there and we'll have a friendly conversation. Explain to me why you want this torn down or why you don't want it open. Give me reasons, not just because you're emotionally charged right now. These people drive me crazy. Like I said, what it's doing is it's taking away from what really happened. People are no longer sympathetic to what happened. They're angry now because of everything that's being thrown out there. And then that leads me to the second topic that we got going on today with our series of 3 here. And that's the new calls for closure of Stardust Racers. Not only does she want this thing closed, but now there's other people like Benjamin Crump and all that, and the family, again, they're latching onto this one. They want it closed down because now they're reporting that the restraints have failed. Restraint failure. And they keep referring to, well, it took 4 times to get Kevin locked in safely so the ride could be dispatched from the station so the green light would come on. And then there's other statements of supposedly other people coming out that say the day that it reopened, which was last Saturday on the 4th, that they couldn't get the restraint locked in place on somebody else. Well, I mean, if that person was too large, that's the only way it's not going to get locked in place. You know, I wish these people that make these claims and that could go in there and actually look at the inner workings of a roller coaster and look at how many fail-safes are in place. Like I said, just to get somebody out of a roller coaster, there's so many things that have to happen to do it manually. It's not like you just flip a switch and, restraints are off, they can come out. There are so many things that have to happen in succession to get somebody out of a roller coaster safely. It can also play into the fact of why these people are saying, well, it took forever to get them out of the ride. Well, yes, you just, like I said, you just don't flip a switch and the harnesses come up. You got a lot more things that you have to do to get these harnesses unlatched. There's so many fail-safes in there. And then it goes back to the harness not coming down in place, right? Ever since some of these other profile accidents, the lady that fell out of the roller coaster in Texas, similar situation. She was very large. She had a hard time getting the lap bar down. And, of course, they did. But at the time, there was no such thing as I call it the 3 clicks rule. Basically, it used to be until that accident happened, the minute the restraint harness would make 1 click, then the green light would go on. Now, since that accident happened, basically the woman's weight pushing up against the lap bar basically caused it to break at one of the outward bank corners, I believe, and it tossed her out of the roller coaster car. The force just pulled her right out, and of course it broke the harness. After that happened, that's when the new 3 clicks rule came into place, or that's how they explain it to me at SeaWorld, because I like to go up to the platforms sometimes and talk to the ride ops before the park opens, and they go over everything. They explain to me how it works and where the harness needs to be before it can actually dispatch from the station safely. And so this 3 clicks rule is basically it's just like it sounds. It's click 1, click 2, click 3, and then the green light comes on. And any roller coaster station you go to now, any more of the modern ones, look up in the corners of the station. Somewhere you'll see a television screen and you'll see a digital version of the coaster train, and you'll see green lights on as the harnesses start locking in place. And if there's not the 3 clicks, that harness isn't going to light up in green on the screen. Therefore, the coaster train is not going to be able to be dispatched from the station. Nothing can override that. You have to have it click down 3 times. And the idea is that 3 clicks gives you a lot more stability than just 1. Meaning if, let's say, the first one were to fail and you're on 3 clicks, then it would go up to number 2. And then number 2 would have to fail and go up into 1. Like there would be a lot of failures in a row that would have to happen to result in that harness basically breaking apart or breaking off. So that's where that comes from. And so now we'll throw up some news articles. This was also sent to me through emails. This says, family of man who died on Stardust Racers demands its closure after new reports of malfunction. So again, this is like the 3rd or 4th time now people are demanding that this ride closes back down again. So let's see what this claim is. This came out yesterday, October 9th. It says, Orlando, Florida, the family of Kevin Rodriguez Zavala, the Epic Universe park visitor who died after riding the Stardust Racers roller coaster, issued a statement demanding that the ride be closed after new reports of restraint malfunctions. Well, let's see what this says. The statement comes after a park visitor reported that a restraint on Universal Stardust Racers did not lock correctly a mere hours after the ride reopened. Witness accounts and intakes from Kevin's case show that his lap bar failed to lock properly until a 4th forceful attempt to lock the restraint was made by a Universal operator. Universal has publicly stated that the ride underwent comprehensive reviews by its own inspectors, the manufacturer, state regulators, as well as a third-party engineer before reopening to the public. However, in a release by attorney Ben Crump, a civil rights and personal injury attorney hired by Kevin's family, he says that within hours of resuming operations, the same restraint malfunction occurred. The parents of Kevin Rodriguez Zavala released the following statement. Universal said the ride was safe, yet news reports show one of the same safety issues that my son experienced just happened again. That tells us nothing has been fixed. They reopened the ride before giving us answers, and the danger is still there. Every rider deserves to come home safe. Until this ride's restraint system is proven safe and the truth about Kevin's death is made public, it should not carry another passenger. Kevin's blood is on Universal's hands. There you go again. There's that. We talked about that the other day, too. Until they do right by him and all riders by closing Stardust Racers until we get answers. Like I said, folks, can we stop with the lying here? They don't want answers. They want this thing closed down, and they don't ever want it to reopen again. Like I said, if Universal was sitting around waiting for Ben Crump and the family to make up their minds on whether or not Stardust Racers should reopen again, it would never reopen. But this type of nonsense is what gets me just a little bit fired up. And this is where people need to be careful. The people that are championing this, although not many, but there are people out there. They want more. They want what Crump said the other day, more government oversight on these rides. They want, all of this stuff to change. Well, you know what's going to happen, folks? If we don't push back on this, the changes that were made recently, where you have to walk to the attraction now. You can't use a transfer seat anymore. Well, that already irritated a large amount of the disabled community because now they feel that because of what this guy did by riding this when he probably shouldn't have, now they're going to be unable to experience some of these roller coasters. So now they're mad at the guy that passed away and the situation. Well, what's going to end up happening now is if there's no pushback on this and for whatever reason, these parks just say, hey, we don't want to deal with all this anymore. So you want more government oversight? You want more stricter rules? Fine. We'll make strict rules. Then that, you know what that'll be? If that harness, that first time you bring it down, if that green light doesn't come on, get off. You're not riding. The restrictions would be so insanely strict that anybody with any type of disability of any sort would not be able to ride. That's where this leads to, and that's why people need to stop championing this kind of talk, because that's exactly where that leads to. They want more government oversight. You get that kind of government oversight, they're going to go in and go, only the perfectly healthy will be able to ride some of these rides. All the rest of you can watch it from off the rides. Because what will happen is these theme park corporations, they're going to hit a point where they're like, we just don't want to deal with this ever again. And also what that could lead to is all of these disability access passes that these theme parks issue. Disney has DAS, Universal, I forget the name of Universal's, but all of these parks that issue that, they could just say, you know what, we're not going to issue this pass anymore either, because by issuing this pass, we're technically saying that a disabled person with certain conditions is safe to ride, because we're giving them this disability pass to ride these rides. So they could come out and say, you know what, we're done issuing all these disability passes. Nothing. The disabled community can watch these rides from a safe standpoint off the ride. Only the perfectly healthy can ride. And I know somebody might come up to me and go, Matt, that's ridiculous. That would never happen. They keep pushing this kind of stuff. That will happen. Trust me. These companies, they only have a certain amount of threshold for BS and just for, outright bad news and lying and all that. And they'd be like, fine, we're just going to shut this down entirely. Nobody rides if you have any type of health conditions. Nothing, period. Technically, the ADA wouldn't have any stand against it either, because by law, a theme park or anybody that operates an attraction, if they take a look at somebody and deem them unsafe to ride or unfit to ride, they can absolutely do that. There is some wiggle room in there that they can absolutely tell somebody, no, you can't ride this, because there's a lot of people out there going, well, if they told people they couldn't ride, there'd be a major lawsuit. Well, they could try to sue, but they would lose the suit every time, as if you research other cases where this has been tried, where an individual has tried to sue a theme park for discrimination because they wouldn't let them ride a certain ride. The person that filed the suit against the park has lost every single time. They always side with the park. These people need to be damn careful what they're wishing for here, because they're going to get something so strict and so severe that it's going to make it miserable for everybody. And so one more thing we got to talk about. That's our third topic today, the Stardust Racers Story. Let's talk about this. So there's a story on Reddit. It's called the Stardust Racers Story. Now, Reddit, I have a love-hate relationship with, because Reddit to me seems like such a chasm of ridiculousness sometimes. I don't go on there a whole lot. So there's a few of the viewers of the channel that sent me this link, and the ones that sent me that were named earlier when I did my thank yous to the viewers that sent me this info. It was labeled as Stardust Racers Story. So I have that. We're going to put it up here. As we read through it, we're going to kind of break it down a little bit. So let's read the story first, and then we'll get into it, all right? All right, before we start this real quick, I want to put a word of warning out there to anybody that might be sensitive to gory details, because this kind of, while it's not insanely bad, it still has some gory details, and it might make people uncomfortable if you don't like that kind of thing. So if you don't like it, you don't want to hear about this, then skip ahead to where we talk about everything. All right, you've had your caution. So here it is, the Stardust Racers Story. Okay, the ride is open again, and there's more information out now, so maybe this is a good time to tell the story of what happened. I've mentioned bits and pieces in a few posts, but I wanted to be sensitive until some time has passed. My wife and I were on the ride, second to last row, when the accident happened. She was right in front of Mr. Zavala, and I was diagonal from him. Stardust was the first ride we did that morning, and it was probably the best roller coaster I've ever been on. Super smooth, fast, exhilarating. We decided to do it one last time before hitting the carousel and heading out for the night. We noticed it was taking a while to get going, and when I turned around, I saw a man transferring himself from a wheelchair to the ride seat using the little butt scoot method. Unlike, say, the Hulk coaster with the shoulder harnesses, Stardust lets you turn around completely and see what's going on behind you. That's the first thing that we're going to break apart in a little bit. I have some questions on that. Within the first third of the way through, the person directly behind me started screaming. I thought it was just normal. This ride is terrifying, screaming. But my wife said she could tell something was off. When the ride finally stopped at the end, our car was paused a bit higher up on the track. That's when I turned around. It was a very gory sight. He appeared to be seated oddly, higher up and leaning back. There was blood everywhere, with multiple obvious injuries to his face and forehead, a huge knot on the left side of his head with blood coming out. My wife started to turn around, and I just told her, nope, not to look. The person next to him was panicking and screaming as the car pulled forward. He slumped over, bending forward at the waist. My wife and I were both yelling for help, for a medic, but it was really loud, and being in the back made it hard to be heard. Since he was now slumped forward, it wasn't immediately obvious how bad things were. It almost looked like he just passed out. That's also when I started to realize there was blood everywhere. I had it on me from literally head to shoe, and it was all over the floor around our feet. The staff took a bit of time to respond. I saw him take a few heavy breaths, but then he seemed to stop. A woman in the queue said she was a doctor and eventually got over to him. That's another one we got to talk about. Not the fact that she was or wasn't a doctor, but there's things that have to happen when you identify yourself as a healthcare professional and you start to administer care to a patient. This took a while because she was on the other side of the track opposite where the guy was sitting, and they had to figure out how to get her over there. I saw her checking for a pulse at some point, but she frowning and shaking her head, no, so I'm guessing she could not find one. I'm not sure how long it all took, long enough for them to clear the queue and get a technician with keys. The whole time the girl next to him was screaming, "Get me off, and his mom is going to kill me." They had a technician to manually unlock the restraints since our car hadn't advanced all the way to the platform. They removed a plastic panel to access the lock. That's probably the piece of metal people were curious about. They struggled to unlock my wife's seat and then moved to me. I got my harness undone, and they started yelling at me to get off the ride, but I basically told them to go to hell because I wasn't leaving my wife and she was still locked in. Once she was free, we just left. I went to the restroom to wash the blood off my legs. Then we went back to the hotel, obviously stunned. Trying to deal with Universal afterward has been an ordeal. Every individual I've spoken with has been kind, empathetic, and understanding, but the guest services protocols are clearly geared toward things like I bought an express pass and I'm unhappy, I still had to wait complaints, not I went home covered in blood issues. I called the Orange County Sheriff's Office because the news said they were investigating, and I wanted to see if they needed a witness statement. I left a voicemail but never heard back. To be honest, I'm kind of shocked about that, and that Universal was not initially proactive in wanting to talk to us, because this was not a person had a heart attack on a ride sort of thing. It was much more extreme than that. All right, so let's talk about this story here for a minute, shall we? There's some, there's just some inconsistencies in here that, coming from a firefighter medic standpoint, I don't understand kind of what this person is writing. It just doesn't make sense. And we'll start here, okay? The first thing he talks about was when he turned around to see what was going on. All right, if you notice on Stardust Racers, okay, if you've ever ridden it, and if you haven't, I got a picture for you. I want you to pay attention to the seats here. I want you to see how these people are situated. See how you're pretty much encapsulated inside of your seat. Not saying you couldn't see something if you turned around, but to get that turned around with your legs and your hips basically anchored in the forward position, for most people is going to be a pretty tough task. I mean, you're going to have to be pretty flexible. And if you look, most people's eyesight hits right where the speakers are, right where the seats kind of curve around where the speakers are, and then you have the big headrest. It just looks that, although not impossible, it would be really hard to get a view of whatever was going on behind you, or even catty corner, if you will, just because of how those seats are designed. So that's kind of the first thing that got me a little questionable on this. So let's move on. So the next point is after the ride was over, outside of, hearing a bunch of terrifying screams on the ride, after it was over, that's when he said he turned around after he heard the girlfriend screaming, supposedly. He turned around again and said that it was a very gory sight. Now, depending if this really happened, depending on how Mr. Rodriguez Zavala was situated, it could very well be, maybe a little easier to see, but I'm not sure that I fully believe this, where you can just turn around like that and see exactly what's going on. I guess I'm going to have to ride Stardust Racers at some point and see if I can turn around and see what's behind me. Every time I've ridden that, I never thought to do that. Of course, you really don't. You can see to the side of you and everything in front of you, but I never thought to see if you could see anything behind you. Like I said, to me, that would be a tough task. So then the details go in about, this is a horrible, bloody sight. And then the next person that kind of comes running over, he says, is a woman that says she's a doctor. Well, I've had this happen to me on various incidents I've been involved in out in the public. I've had people come up to me saying, I'm a doctor, I'm this, I'm that. And then my first question is, you're a doctor, what kind of doctor are you? And nothing against all the doctors out there, but usually what it results in is I'm a doctor of podiatry, or I'm a dentist, or I'm, a doctor of something other than an emergency doctor. And same thing, I was on a Southwest flight 2 years ago, heading to visit some family, and in the middle of the flight attendants got on the intercom and says, is there anybody with any medical training on board the aircraft? Raise your hand. Well, myself and another individual up front raised their hands. Well, they came back and asked me, what my credentials were. And I said, I'm a nationally registered paramedic. I said, I have lots of experience in the emergency room and everything else. And she said, we're going to use you. She said, nothing against the guy up front, but he said he's a doctor. But when we asked what kind, he's a podiatrist, a foot doctor. So there's not a lot of, aid he's going to be able to render at this moment. So unless you're, an emergency room type of physician or doctor, those are usually the people that can help. Not saying that any other doctors don't have any knowledge out there, but when it comes to this kind of stuff, usually an ER doctor, a paramedic, an EMT, those are going to be your people with some of the best knowledge, and nurses. So this woman identifies herself as a doctor and comes over. Now, the one thing that I don't quite get is it said that she did get over there and it took a while, but then they claims that she was checking for a pulse at some point and then frowning and shaking her head no. So I'm guessing she could not find one. This is another thing that just doesn't quite add up. Now, is it possible that somebody would go up to this person as he slumped forward and like check for a carotid pulse? I mean, usually that's what we're trained to do, but if you're going to do that, don't just start looking at people and shaking your head no. Like, that's bad optics. If you're going to perform aid to somebody, you're going to check for a carotid pulse and that, because that's usually, it's right here. The reason everybody checks that is because that's the one that has the most pressure. It's the nearest to the heart. If you don't feel that, then you got some serious issues going on. But if you're going to check for that carotid pulse and you don't feel anything, I'm not going to look straight into a crowd and shake my head no. I'm not going to do that. It's bad show, and two, it looks terrible. So if this person did that, better than that, especially being a doctor. Don't do that. If you can't feel a pulse, then you keep it to yourself. Or if there's somebody nearby you, you say, I don't have anything, let's start CPR, or let's do something, but don't just look at everybody and shake your head no. That's why I'm like, I'm not so sure about that. And then it talks about, he turned around again and saw how bloody of a sight it was. And then his wife was going to turn around and look. And he said, don't do it. It's too bad. But if she's sitting right in front of Mr. Rodriguez Zavala, there's absolutely no way she would be able to see that anyway. I mean, going back to the other seat pictures of Stardust Racers, they're too tall. You wouldn't be able to see that. And then it talks about once they were freed out of the car, I will say this, folks, if you are riding with a family member, your wife, your girlfriend, whomever you're with, a loved one, and they have to emergently evacuate you all out of the roller coaster, get out of the car and go wait where they tell you to. Don't sit there and tell somebody to go to hell. Your loved one is in good hands. The reason they want you out of there is because it's less people on the platform, but also, this also is a crime scene. The more you hang around, the more you're likely to be a part of that, and then you're not going to be able to leave. So if they tell you to leave, they have good reason. Go leave the platform and go where they tell you to wait, and then when they get your loved one unlatched, then they will meet up with you. But don't sit there and make an ass out of yourself because, well, I'm not leaving this person behind. You're not leaving them behind. They're in the care of the employees. That just further complicates things. But then is where this really starts to go off the rails with me. He says he went to the restroom to wash the blood off my legs, and then we went back to the hotel, obviously stunned. So you mean to tell me that this guy walked off the platform all the way down the stairs? If you've been to Stardust Racers, it's a process to get down to the lower level, to the lockers, and then off the ride. I mean, it's not like you just step off the ride and you're off and away from the coaster. You have to, it's a process to get out of the main attraction or out of the attraction queue area. I have a hard time imagining that this guy walked all that way down the stairs, got his stuff out of the lockers if he had any, and out the attraction, past hundreds of people likely, covered in blood that nobody would have said, hey, man, I need to talk to you. Like he's just going to go into a bathroom and splash water on his hands and just wash the blood off his leg. That to me is really, really far-fetched. Like, what did you do? Stand over a drain, take your shoes and socks off, and then just splash water on your legs and what? Like that doesn't make sense. Okay, so I don't get that part. And then he says that he's been trying to deal with Universal, and it's been an ordeal. Because he says Universal's guest services is more geared to help with people that I'm unhappy I had to wait because I had fast passes to. I went home covered in blood. Like I just cannot imagine a guy walking out of a theme park just head to toe covered in blood. Like, it just doesn't make any sense at all. Like, that part to me just seems so far out there. Also, too, theme parks have strict regulation on even if there's the slightest drop of blood on the ground. Basically, everything around that area stops. It gets cordoned off. It has to be cleaned and scrubbed. Like, it's a big deal. If an employee comes into health services at SeaWorld that has blood on them from a guest or from their whatever, however it got there, the process to get them cleaned up is insane. So the fact that they just let this guy walk off the ride platform and into some random bathroom somewhere on Epic Universe property, just covered in blood, and let him wash it off himself, I have a hard time with that. And then the other thing is like I said, the Orange County Sheriff's Office hasn't gotten back to him. Maybe the reason they haven't gotten back to him is because maybe he gave this statement and they're all like, yeah, this did not happen. Because like I said, folks, cops, firefighters, paramedics, EMTs, nurses, doctors, we all have this sense that's ingrained in us. When you can tell when somebody's telling you something, whether or not it's real or not. Like, you just have a way of knowing. It's like this. I read through this and I'm like, there's a lot here that just doesn't add up at all. And because of my experience in emergency services and working in a theme park. The other thing that I want to add into this, and he talks about being covered with blood again. It was all over the floor. It was everywhere, right? I'm going to put a picture of Stardust Racers up here again. You're going to see a side view of the cars. I'm going to put a couple different photos in. We'll cycle them around. But you're going to see a side view of the car, and then we'll show a picture very similar, if not maybe the same one that I did earlier, where it shows how hard it would be to look behind you. Looking at these pictures, how in the world would it be that if you were riding Stardust Racers going at 60-some miles an hour, up and down hills and valleys and all around the track, right, all around the course, one, how are you going to get covered in blood if you're in front of this person with those seats as high as they are, with the seat backs and everything, with those as high as they are, and traveling forward? at 60 some miles an hour and through all the elements of the course layout, how are you going to get covered in blood? Because if I recall, like when you're traveling forward, everything's going this way. It's like if you were to spit, right? If you were to lean out and spit, the person behind you is going to get hit with that likely, not the person in front of you. You know what I'm saying? Even like you go through that celestial spin, people behind you are going to get affected by, like, let's say somebody blows chunks. The people behind you and likely to the side of you will probably feel it, but people in front of you aren't, they're not going to get any of that likely. I mean, unless it was slowing down, it was projectiled out. But if he claims that this was all happening while the ride was ongoing, how are you covered in blood with the ride moving forward at that speed? And then the other thing is where is it? How is it on the floor? I mean, I get it. It could be on the floor where Kevin was, but how would it be on the floor by him? Because these cars are separated by dividers. If you look in the picture, there's dividers there. Like it's not like just one open floor front to back. Everything is separate. So how does that happen? And you can tell, like, looking at the pictures that I've put up there, like, do y'all see where I'm coming from on this? Do y'all see, like, why I'm a little skeptical at this story? I mean, it's not surprising it comes from Reddit. Like I said, Reddit's kind of one of those places in the internet that's just kind of like, oh, okay. But I will read through it with an open mind, and then I'll come up with my own opinions on it. And I think, through my own professional opinion, that this story is pretty fictitious. For one, this guy claims he was in the back car, but everything about the incident, especially when, Ben Crump, in the first press conference, held up a picture of Stardust Racers of the coaster train, pointed to the front car and said he was here. He was right there in the front, which, with him repeatedly hitting his head on that front bar, makes sense, right? Now, the part where the guy talks about them unlocking the seats, I could see that part. There's a panel that has to come off that detaches where they have to put the keys in. Just like on Manta. Manta is a similar thing at SeaWorld. There's a little panel that you have to remove that the keys go into. So that I could see. Maybe this person wasn't on the ride. Maybe they were in the vicinity of the ride or somewhere and saw some of this but wanted to maybe embellish it a little bit. I'm not really sure. I would love to sit down with a person that wrote this and, like, literally pick their mind a little bit. You know what I'm saying? Like, people that have a wealth of knowledge in a specialty, you let somebody sit down and, like, kind of let the line out a little bit, let them run with it, and then start bringing them in. Kind of like anybody that's in the military, especially the Navy. Y'all heard of a guy named Don Shipley? He's got a YouTube channel called Former Buds 131, and he busts all the fake Navy SEALs out there. And he's brilliant in doing it because he'll call these people up. He won't outright say that he's a SEAL. He'll tell them he's a retired bosun mate. And then, he'll talk with him. He'll get him going, basically casting the line out there for a while. And then once these people start running with it, then he'll set the hook in them. He'll start bringing them in, and then their story falls apart. So that's how I feel this story is. It's like, I was reading it, I'm like, okay, I kind of see this. But then when he started going into the details with the blood, and then the woman doctor coming over there and, checking a pulse and looking at everybody and shaking her head no, like, I don't see that happening. And again, if it did happen, if that woman did do that and looked at a large crowd of people and shook her head no, that's terrible, ma'am. You should know better than that. Don't ever do that. Any of you that are in the emergency services that take care of anybody in the public, whatever it is you do, especially if you're newer, don't ever go into a large scene like that. And if you have an unresponsive patient, don't check their pulse. And if you don't feel anything, just don't look at the crowd of people and shake your head. Please don't do that. You keep that stuff to the people that you're with that's trying to help the patient. That's who you keep that to. Don't do that, which I'm hoping this is made up because I really struggle with the visual of somebody actually doing that. But that's the Stardust Racers Reddit story. What do you all think? Do you think I'm kind of on par with this? Do you think I'm loony for breaking it apart like that? Like, where are you at? Just curious, And again, feel free to leave your comments. I love reading through them. You guys' comments are great, man. Everybody's so engaging. And as I've said before, I try to get to all of them, but man, when you get hundreds like there are now, it is tough. But what maybe we'll try to do is I can do like a question and answer vlog coming up where we'll break down the comment section. Maybe we can even do it on a live stream. Or then we could talk, almost like face to face or face to chat, if you will. So that's it, everybody. Keep sending the comments. Keep sending the emails. I really, really enjoy interacting with all of you. It's awesome. This is really neat how this whole thing is coming together. Like people have said, it's sad that it kind of took an incident like this to kind of bring everybody together. But I'm also glad it did, because at some point we're going to move forward from this incident, and there's going to be other things to talk about, other things to go over, other things to explore. Like I said, I have an entire list of things to do now that summer's coming to an end and we don't have to worry about the everyday thunderstorms and the 110 degree humid days anymore. We actually go out and spend a lot of time outdoors and don't have to worry about planning around the thunderstorms and all that. So we're getting into a fantastic time here in Florida for the next 7 or 8 months. So I've got a lot to bring you. Look forward to it. A fantastic weekend. If your college or NFL teams are playing, I hope they win. Damn, man, the Yankees let me down again this year. God dang, man. One of these times we'll have another 2009 season again. Maybe they ought to bring back Jorge Posada and Brett Gardner and Granderson and all those guys. They'd bring them back. They'd be just fine. Fire Medic Adventures out. Have a good one. See ya.